And welcome back. This is R.C. Williams with Watchman Action with a Watchman Action Special Report. Earlier this year on our sister publications, ripped from the headlines and We Are the Watchmen Weekly, we spoke with Peter A. Gallo about what's going on with the UN and UNRWA. The insanity of October 7th of last year cannot be understated. When we had Peter on, he told us the story of what actually happened. And then he was able to forecast, here are the things that are going to come next. Well, Peter's back on with us today because he was right. So we're going to talk about what happened and why it happened. We'll go into the prediction that came true of what's happening now. And then we'll ask Peter to look into his crystal ball and take a look at what's going to happen next so that you're informed. We'll do all that and more coming up next on this Watchman Action Special Report. Stay tuned. Welcome back to this Watchman Action Special Report. This is R.C. Williams, and now joining us on the Newsmaker line, Peter A. Gallo. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, been a busy time for you, my friends. So look, let's jump right into it. Let's give people a 30,000-foot view of the last time that we were on together about what happened. And then I'd like to get into what you predicted and then what's happening now before we jump into where you think things are going to go next. So, sir, the floor is yours.
To remind you, what happened was the Israeli government passed information to the United Nations, specifically to UNRWA, the UN Relief Works Agency for Palestine, and they identified 12 individuals who were employees, locally employed staff of UNRWA in Gaza, who they said were actively involved in the terrorist attacks in Israel on the 7th of October. And the UN mildly panicked. The immediate response, well, it wasn't quite immediate, but the immediate public response was that the 12 individuals were summarily dismissed, and that OIOS, that's the Office of Internal Oversight Services, which is the office I used to work in the UN and has been described as the highest investigative body within the UN system, that OIOS was going to investigate these allegations. Now, at that point, I threw my hands up and said, hold on a minute, I don't think you can. And I said that for a number of reasons. One, the UN, the investigative office in the UN has only got authority to investigate UN staff members. These individuals had been fired. They were no longer UN staff members. So legally, they had no authority to investigate them. They had no power to compel them to attend for an interview or anything. So what are we doing? Right? The idea should normally be that you have an investigation in order to provide the facts in order to make a decision. You don't do it the other way around. The UN did this, and they complained that they alleged in an attempt to try and explain themselves that this was called reverse due process. Great. So that is a fancy way of saying we are basically shoot first and ask questions later, and that's perfectly okay. Well, the second issue is you couldn't actually conduct a meaningful investigation in Gaza whilst there was an ongoing conflict. You know, this is a small piece of real estate with an active shooting war going on. What are you going to do? Knock on doors, right? Not only that, it is controlled by Hamas, which, although the UN disagrees, is a terrorist organization, and was being attacked for essentially engaging in a terrorist attack in Israel. And you cannot describe the 7th of October attacks as anything other than that. It was extreme violence for a political objective. So whether the UN wants to describe it as terrorism or not, we know what it is. You're not going to operate in that environment and do anything which is going to contradict the Hamas narrative. And thirdly, I know a lot of the people who worked there when I was there, they're still there. And I'm sorry, but nobody there had any background in investigating anything in a terrorist situation, and the experience that you have conducting in administrative investigations as to whether somebody charged something twice on his expense report, or whether the proper procedure in a recruitment exercise was followed, is quite frankly irrelevant. And what I said at the time was that this investigation was going to go nowhere. The Israelis were never going to share their sources, and they were never going to provide the raw source data with them. And you could tell that, right? And as a result, the investigation would be conclusive. And I said that the named individuals would be cleared. And not only that, that they were then going to turn around and claim compensation for unfair dismissal. And although the UN has not specifically admitted that, if you read the statement from the statement from the UN spokesman, that is what they are alluding to.
So, Peter, just so we're clear, you gave us the background. Your prediction was that the investigation would basically go nowhere. Not only would that be the case, but the people who were going to be dismissed were going to try to turn around and, in essence, get compensation. Am I following you?
There was no trying about it. If there was a bookie would have taken money on, I would have bet money on it myself. Right. So
now,
the question is this.
Yeah.
Why would the director of investigations accept such an assignment? I mean, I can tell you the reason I never made a mess of a major investigation when I was, in all the years I've been working, is because I'm smart enough to know not to take on jobs that I cannot do.
Yeah.
Right? But the fiction in the UN is that OIOS is independent. It's about as independent as my left kidney, right? And in practice, it functions to basically keep senior management happy. And it's perfectly understandable. That is why the people in senior positions in OIOS are in senior positions, because it's a mutual back scratching and favoritism. Professionalism and integrity, unfortunately, has absolutely nothing to do with it. And this is exactly what has happened. There has been a whitewash of an investigation, and the result that has been produced has been the result which basically best suits both the UN and Hamas.
So, Peter, basically, what you said was going to happen has now happened. Am I following you?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't like to claim to have the gift of second sight, but on this one, I believe I've nailed it.
So the thing that you said at the end of your last statement, you said to the best interests of the UN and Hamas. I think what's missing there, which ties back into what you were just saying, is the truth in and of itself seems to be missing there. But it seems like that's on purpose, right?
Yeah. Look, my claim to fame in terms of being an investigator in the UN is I was the investigator who was told in writing and officially that as an investigator, I must never ask questions just to satisfy my curiosity. Now, you go and find another investigative body anywhere in the world where anyone has ever been given such a directive, right? And I'll be impressed. But you can, okay, anyone can have, shall we say, superiors who are slightly eccentric or who don't understand what day of the week it is. But what is curious is that in my entire experience in the UN, nobody, bar nobody, in any position of authority in the organization stopped to think, well, wait a minute, the guy may have a bit of a point here. No, because objective truth is not part of the consciousness, is not part of the culture. Right? All we're interested in doing is following the procedure. We manipulate the procedure to give us the result that we want.
So, Peter, you saying that actually spurs another question in my head. So I'll ask the obvious question, and you can provide, I guess, what would be the obvious answer. Doesn't this in many ways run counter to what the UN says on the surface is their actual mission of helping people. It doesn't sound like they're helping anybody except other people who want to do harm to people. Is that right?
In this situation, absolutely. The 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 entire Arab-Israeli conflict
Hmm.
has been, I'm going to say, a running sore on with the UN. I think the UN called it wrongly, and you've got to go back. And as I have considered this on a number of occasions, the the UN resolution, which essentially voted in favor of the two-state solution and led to the establishment of the state of Israel, right? Was accepted by the Jewish settlers, by the Israelis, and rejected by the Arab member states.
Hmm.
And the very day that Israel declared independence, five neighboring Arab countries invaded in 1948, and we know how badly that went for them.
Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing is that happened just a couple of years after the war crimes trials in Nuremberg at the end of the Second World War, where
Hmm.
we prosecuted the Nazi leadership for what? For waging an offensive war. Well, I'm very sorry, but if it was good enough to throw at the Nazis at Nuremberg, why then did five UN member states get a buy for basically doing the very same thing? And not only that, but they invaded a country in contravention of a General Assembly resolution. Now,
Wow.
let me explain something. If you join the golf club, right,
Hmm.
and you disagree with something that's voted in a committee meeting and start beating up on the other members I'd rather suggest that the club wouldn't stand for that.
Correct.
Uh, okay, now explain to me why it is different that the countries that invaded the state of Israel in 1948 were accepted. They were not prosecuted, not condemned for waging an aggressive war. And the best excuse I can come up with is, well, we were kind of tired because we just spent 5 years defeating Nazi Germany. But I'm sorry, that is maybe a convenient political answer, but we
Hmm.
have reaped the rewards of that for the last 80 years.
I I continue to be amazed by the hypocrisy. I mean, the incompetence of the UN is one thing, but the hypocrisy of it all uh, also fascinates me, and I know fascinates people who read our publications and watch our shows. Peter, so you set the stage for what was going to happen, right? You said, okay, look, here's where this ultimately ends. That has now happened. Looking ahead, what do you see coming out of this, and what's going to happen next?
This is where I'll have to give you a sad reflection,
Mhm.
um, because I don't actually believe anything is going to change. There is a lack of willingness in the General Assembly, and that basically puts the problem onto all 193 member states, right? That nobody is willing to go out on a limb. No one's willing to take any chances. So, we are left with an ongoing problem that in the Middle East, that the United Nations is manifestly incapable of addressing, and which no one, and none of the other member states are interested in dealing with.
Hmm.
Um, there is obviously, at the moment in the United States, there's a lot of hope attached to the outcome of the election in November.
Hmm.
But at a geopolitical level, the problem is that all of the member states know how corrupt, inefficient, and inept the UN Secretariat is, and they will
Right.
admit that to you and to me in private. But the diplomatic functions of the organization are of more importance than the administrative. So the incompetence and the ineptitude of the secretariat and the funds and programs is tolerated because as I say, the diplomatic functions are more important. But I believe that that is a very short-term, very limited view. And I can pick another example out of the ether, shall we say. Let us assume that there was a conflict to erupt in a place that neither you or I have been to or have any particular connection to or knowledge of, like Tajikistan. I can't speak for you, but I would struggle to find that on a map. So let's say there's a humanitarian crisis in Tajikistan. We are relying on the United Nations information and humanitarian aid programs and everything else for the international community to address that.
Right.
I don't believe we can rely on that information. If you look at what happened in the Syrian civil war, right? All of a sudden, and I'm sorry to have to to bring religion into it, but the support that the Palestinians get from the Islamic world has to be compared and contrasted to the lack of support that was shown for the situation in Syria, which is an Islamic country, where the UN was basically acting at the behest of the Assad regime. And some of the allegations that have come out of there, I mean, the one that almost had me laughing was in the midst of the conflict and the chemical warfare and the atrocities going on in Syria, that there had been a seminar on breastfeeding in the workplace, which was put on by the UN, I believe, in conjunction with the World Health Organization. And that was very good. Well, excellent. Yeah. To have breastfeeding in the workplace, you need a number of factors. One, you need a workplace. Number two, you probably need some women on the workforce. And this seminar was being run in conjunction with the Syrian Ministry of Health. There were no women present on the panel.
Wow.
And less than 5 miles away, the regime was using chemical weapons and opening fire and killing their own citizens. And what do you think the UN press releases were all about that day?
Oh boy.
All right,
Peter, so we're talking again, and I'm blown away by your ability to give context to it. Last question before we wrap up this segment. Given what's going on as we're having this discussion with Iran, do you see Iran or Hamas or a combination of both actively attacking or triggering a war with Israel, given everything that's happened? And if you do, is the UN in some way complicit in that based on what you just said?
I would be very unwilling to make a prediction on that. I have visited Iran. I have seen the country firsthand, oddly enough. The thing which struck me about Iran is the difference between the official government line on anything and the views of the individual population on the street.
Yeah.
But this is a manifestation of this ongoing Arab-Israeli conflict because of the refusal to accept the result of the ill-judged war of 1948. And the UN has to bear some responsibility for maintaining that and fostering that situation. the schools and the teaching alone in the UNRWA schools for years have been teaching extremism and hatred, and how it's every Palestinian's child's obligation to kill the Jews and to clear the land of the is absolutely abhorrent.
Mm-hmm.
That information is all in the public domain. The UN has been uninterested in doing anything about it, and has 1,000,001 excuses as to why they cannot, of course. But I think the primary problem is that the UN was not prepared to act on information that gave any credibility to Israel, or any justification for the Israeli position on anything, because in the UN mindset, that was basically contrary to the narrative, and it is perpetuating an 80-year-old problem.
Wow. Peter, where can people find you and your work? How can they help you?
I don't ask for help. I'm right or wrongly. This just happens to be something I know about. There are other organizations. The leading one, which I'm not connected to at all, is UN Watch, and something that I think every parent in the country will relate to is this question of the education system and the schools, and what the schools are teaching. And if you go onto the UN Watch website and look at the work they've done, look at the identification they have done of individuals who are employed by UNRWA, who are actively involved in like sharing confidential information, preaching, this anti-Islamic, this anti-Israeli extremist positions and all the rest of it, the textbooks that they're using. And you've got to ask yourself, why is this tolerated?
Right.
But I'm not on your program today to promote myself, nor am I asking for anything. But this is a far bigger problem than I am.
Peter Gallo, thank you again for being with us. For more information, you can go to watchmanaction.org. We'll link to this interview and also provide links to Peter's other work and our first interview. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you soon.
Thank you for having me.